be a couple of We've got a couple of folks who may be joining a minute or so late, but thank you for everyone who is here, and let's just get started. I know Jonathan wanted to kick off with a couple of thoughts from our Zoom that we had with the Office of Cannabis Management. What was that?
About 2 weeks ago now. We were able to touch base with a couple of folks from there. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like there were too many updates on a couple of things that we asked about yet. They're still sort of in the process of figuring out. They are hoping to have some sort of guidance on community facilities, so things like daycares, things like parks, things that aren't captured within schools and places of worship that might still be subject to like community buffer zones of some sort. They're hoping to have some guidance on that by about mid-May, it sounded like, but again, it's still a little bit up in the air. Still no clear timeline on the criteria for getting grants from the Community Grant Reinvestment Fund, but that's the next thing that we'll start be watching for. But we were able to get in touch with them. We have sort of a channel of communication open, hopefully, but still kind of wait and see, it seems like.
Well, we also, one of the things I was really pleased about was that we had not been receiving updates on the Cannabis Advisory Board meetings, and I think it's very important for us so we now have remedied that. And also, like Jonathan said, want to keep an eye on the criteria for the grants, because now that there are actually dispensaries open, we should start to see that, what was it, $4.9 million amount. It was just from the medical component. That was the reported amount in the fund as of February 1st, but that's going to start increasing pretty rapidly. So one of the key points, not to hijack, but one of the questions we had was about data and the kind of data that we should be collecting now, and this is relevant for your discussion tonight, so that we are best positioned to apply for grants according to whatever kind of funding priorities the city comes up with your input. Meaning, I asked the folks from OCM, what type of assumptions are already going to be baked into their eligibility criteria for places, and I'll just quickly summarize, in places like, say, New York City, there's a lot of data on the disparate impact, even by borough or, of the war on drugs, different components of the war on drugs. I do not know of that level of granular data that's been collected for Kingston. And it's not the way that our grants management folks tend to apply, or it's not the type of eligibility criteria that is most common, I think, for our grants management folks. And so as you all start coming up with some recommendations, and then, eventually that gets to our electeds, we want to make sure that we have whatever might be necessary to back up our application for funding from that grant, that source of money. So we were trying to figure out some of that, and it was interesting. I think was his name Adam or Phillips? Well, we haven't had anybody else ask about the data, which makes me a little bit concerned. And we'll start maybe pulling together some of that ourselves, because I just don't know that we can rely on the assumptions in other states. Anything else on OCM?
That's probably but anyways, just kind of as we're staying in touch with them, hopefully, if there are any other questions that you'd like us to follow up with them, by means send them our way, or if you have anything that comes to mind now. But,
I do have one question. I don't know if it was you sent data or Steve Ellman or somebody sent around information on different companies who are going to have different dispensaries in different counties. And there was a few companies that had 4 or more locations. You're smiling because it's supposed to only be 3. So what's going on?
That's a great question for someone other than me.
Oh, yeah,
Jonathan.
No, you said you were going to bring
answer.
these questions
Yeah.
to the OCM, so
Got it. Yeah.
that's my question.
Got it.
How can you give 4 licenses to one big company when you're supposed to only have 3 locations if you get a license? That's the way it's written.
Right.
So what's gonna prevent these big companies from saying to somebody, say, I'm gonna just say a woman of color who wants to do this, who doesn't have the money, and says, listen, women of color get first crack. We'll give you the money. You open it up, we'll sell you our product, and then you can run the place for us. So then they have 20 places, and within 2 years, they offer them each $500,000 to back out, go open your own place. And then you have 5 companies that own 100 dispensaries in New York. That's my question to them. How is that gonna be prevented?
Okay.
It's already happening, but I mean,
Yeah, just wondering.
how, what are they gonna do to, like, regulate that? That's my question.
That's a great question.
Anyway,
So we may, when we follow up, and again, they invited us to kind of come back after this monthly meeting and sort of keep the dialogue going. Maybe we can also see, what opportunity there might be to have some representative speak.
Yeah.
Or if we can organize, maybe some, I don't know everyone's schedule, but some sort of joint participation in the next scheduled meeting during our open questions, open session.
Yeah, that's something I remember there being interested before, so we can definitely try and push on that and see if we can set something up.
And so one more thing came to mind as you were talking, I forgot to mention that they also provided a kind of long list of resources that I guess they've been developing and maybe had somewhere buried on their site, but certainly hadn't been circulated to my office. And so one responded to the issue at last month's meeting about law enforcement standards. And so we need to make sure that we send that to the police commission. And the other, there was one more point, it wasn't just the, we also got, I know, medical cannabis, medical personal cultivation safety guidelines that we have already shared with with Bartek Stardai, who's overseeing our rezoning. Because one of the points that they made was that these regulations remain in flux. And so our rezoning, which hopefully will finalize fairly soon, will likely finalize before they have finalized their regulations. And so we thought that passing along the medical guidelines that we've already sort of got through on protecting plants in that context would protect us from somewhat from having to then go back and change our code once they should get their regulations in order. Is there anything else they sent us? I feel like there might have been one.
Broken falls again. Those are major things. Okay, so moving on from OCM, if there are kind of nothing else on that for now. Really the big focus for tonight, at the end of our last meeting, there was a word from the mayor about really wanting to get some concrete recommendations from this group about how the city should be proceeding on a number of these issues. Really kind of 2 major ones that came up in the last discussion were this concept of having buffer zones around certain sensitive facilities. So the state is coming in and saying that for schools, places of worship, there's going to be a certain fixed buffer zone coming from the state level. So we really can't do a whole lot with that. But there's been a lot of kind of signaling that there is going to be leeway for municipalities to set up their own buffers around things like daycares, things like parks. They're just kind of broadly lumping these as community facilities. And so really just to kind of start off on this point, it's a very open-ended discussion. So really any recommendations, any feelings that you might have on this topic is definitely something we can push along. But if you anticipate, like from yourself, from your community people that you've spoken with, if there are likely to be certain concerns, certain things people want to see, anything that we can sort of turn into a recommendation to pass along, that's really our first goal here.
Well, from people I've spoken to, the main concern is the smell, personally. They don't, walking down the street having the smell, which I think is also a big concern. I mean, look, you go into some bars and the smell of beer, you could just walk by the bar and it's offensive, but So maybe we have to have recommendations that they have specific kind of air scrubbers within the place.
Have what, would you say?
Air scrubbers.
Oh, right, air
Like
scrubber.
in Amsterdam, every single coffee shop has these beautiful air scrubbers that clean the air so that people.
Like
you
an
just smell it.
ionizer? Type
Yeah,
of-
well, it's charcoal
Okay.
thing. It sucks all the air and spits it out the other end, charcoal filter.
Okay. I would like that more than to have a buffer zone. I mean,
Yeah.
and I say this having, we had those really hot 90-degree days last week. And I was at Kingston Point Beach for a lot of hours, and I really did smell weed like constantly. I mean, but I would not be in favor of saying, a buffer zone around the beach. Or, having the beach as a buffer zone, or having certain parts as, because I mean, I don't wanna be so, I really wanna involve the police as little as possible, let's put it that way.
And talking to the police and listening to I talked to the sheriff personally, and I heard the police, what was he, the captain or chief of police, said it's the lowest on his priority.
Yeah,
So there's so much guns, there's violence, there's so much, unless there's a complaint, he's not doing anything.
right,
And the sheriff gave me the same thing, he said, we are not going to go after cannabis crime unless it's huge and has violence. Because that's it, we're not doing it. And it was a time where I was in the lobby with him of the sheriff's office, and there were like 300 people going for gun permits. And his words were, you think I could worry about cannabis when there's 300 people every hour?
yeah,
And he said, look, they're moms and pops and regular people, they don't want guns, that's and he said, cannabis, it's not gonna be like a priority. And I think the police chief of Kingston said the same thing. last meeting.
yeah, the last one.
Yeah, there's only so many workers in the police force right now. But the one thing I wanted to add was, are we talking about actual consumption or are we talking about stores?
So this would be stores. So essentially, like, when we're talking about a buffer zone here, I believe it's currently 500 feet is the radius that's set. So if you have a school or a place of worship, you can't have a facility that's selling cannabis within that radius. And there's some debate ongoing about how you actually measure that, whether that's from the entryway, specifics like that will get hammered out. But just sort of in the abstract sense, we can't do too much with that buffer zone. That's coming from the state. But if we want to come in and add our own, there are certain facilities where we may have that ability to limit sales. So this isn't getting as much to, if you have it already, where you're consuming.
If we're just talking about dispensaries, then we don't have to worry about smell, because nobody's smoking in dispensaries. That would only be for lounges.
Right.
And so just so that, I know you're taking notes too, but so that I take notes on the consensus, we're talking here about for lounges, recommending, if it's within our discretion, some sort of air
Purifier,
purification.
yeah, I think that's important, just so, for me, it's just so we don't get complaints from the community, like I smell this constantly. It would really cut down a lot on that kind of diversity.
So I guess that's a question for us to think through, the degree to which we as a municipality have authority to require that type of in dispensary kind of infrastructure of some sort. And now I remember the other point too. OCM did share with us some best practices for dispensary design. And this is an issue that came up in some other conversations around kind of managing the design of the space to improve public safety. I think from other jurisdictions, someone I spoke to from Colorado talked about how they found an increase in sort of not violent assaults, but robberies when there was only a single door in and out. And so that's one question we should probably earmark for Bartek too, about how, if at all, might some of those best practices for design either align with or sort of diverge from our design standards in under the new code and different transactions.
Since it's only gonna be it's gonna be cash only at the beginning. And that's makes those places very vulnerable.
They are vulnerable, though I'm not sure if they're all cash only.
Are they gonna allow banks gonna allow it if it's federally illegal?
So I think there are a lot of, on display, there are lots of these innovative payment methods.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the membership plan, like
Oh, yeah, all the
You know,
clubs belong
yeah,
to.
yeah. So I agree, these are likely to be cash heavy operations, but they may not be cash exclusive ones.
That's better, safe.
As far as stores go, in my opinion, with parks and daycares, you know, to put this on the same level as a place that sells beer and tobacco, I don't see that buffer being real as far as that goes. It's the same kind of,
I agree. I think that should be the model of find out what the alcohol, prohibition laws are and as far as location and all the other issues and sort of set the same standard for cannabis.
Yeah, and I see we do have a point from Steve, so I'm going to turn it to him in a sec. But this is something I asked Bartek Starda, our planning director, our staff members in charge of the rezoning, asked him about. With the current draft of the rezoning, there is no equivalent buffer zone for stores that are selling alcohol. So if we were to do something like that for cannabis facilities, it would be sort of a deliberate departure for what we're doing for alcohol at the moment.
It applies to like bars, but not to places that sell alcohol, that's what you're saying, I think the current.
Right. As I understand it, the current draft is not imposing that sort of buffer zone on any facility that's selling a controlled substance. So that's including alcohol, tobacco, would include cannabis. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve right now because he's got his hand raised. Steve?
I'm a little unclear. Are we to make recommendations solely regarding commerce? Or are we to make recommendations regarding local regulation of public use and consumption?
So right now, we're talking about the authority we have to extend a buffer.
I understand that. That's related to commercial establishments.
And
What about, are there going to be local laws regarding public use and consumption? I go purchase my product somewhere, I'm sitting in a city park, I want to light up. Am I cool?
so I think that our plan heretofore has been to treat smoking like smoking.
Right, like cigarettes.
So I believe smoking is banned in city
All
parks.
bars, yeah.
And so all smoking is banned in city parks.
Okay, so so that answers my underlying question in the affirmative. We're also expected to make recommendations about public use and consumption by private individuals.
Somewhat. I mean, I guess I'm giving something of a lawyerly answer because, we can't, I don't think we have authority
I think
to
it's
just
already
tell people
preset
to
already.
stop smoking walking down the street. What we can do on city property is impose, you can't smoke cigarettes here around City Hall, and so that would be the same. But our authority is limited in other areas.
And
Well-
kind of just, sorry.
I'm still not quite satisfied as to, I mean, I think all kinds of questions could arise as to public use and consumption.
Well, what are some that you have on your mind? Maybe we should drill down.
Well, what if I'm just standing on a street corner with a couple of friends and we want to share a bowl? Suppose 3 or 4 of us are outside of, let's just call it Tubby's.
that's illegal.
3 people can't stand on a street corner and smoke a joint.
Not in front of a bar. You can go down the street 50 feet and do it.
Oh, okay. All right.
You can't smoke outside a bar,
No.
like cigarettes?
Any place, cigarettes you can, but marijuana, you can't smoke near a bar or in a bar. Any place that sells alcohol
Alcohol and cannabis are not gonna mix.
Yeah. You
No,
can't
I
do
didn't
both.
know,
Yeah.
outside the bar, well,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, you can get away with it for sure, because everybody's doing it, but it's illegal.
But if you sell alcohol, you can't sell cannabis, and the same if you're selling, if you have a cannabis lounge, you're not gonna sell beer.
Right,
mean,
well,
my-
we just, I mean, but outside, I'm just.
Yeah, everybody does it anyway.
Yeah, there are food restrictions too. You can't sell, that was in the proposed regulation, material that they sent.
Right.
Non-cannabis containing food and beverages cannot be sold in the same places.
Right. Now, all the cannabis trucks that were in New York, they all got busted, not for selling cannabis, being unlicensed food vendors. They confiscated the trucks, but they all had edibles, and they didn't have a food license. And you need to have a certified kitchen for a food license.
Brilliant.
And all that stuff, so they took all the trucks away based on food license, not on cannabis.
But I guess getting back to Steve's point, I mean, we're drilling down on, I think, a really important distinction here, but for his broader question, I guess he's asking, are we going to try to make it harder for people to at least smoke, since we're thinking of smoking, in public places? So maybe that is, I don't believe we have the authority to do that, but it's also useful to discuss.
But
what
even if we did do
want to
that, I believe that's a law enforcement issue. And already the police chief and the sheriff of Ulster County both said we're not gonna process that at all. So they're not gonna come and bust you for smoking, walking down the street if we say you shouldn't do it.
They'll tell you to put it out, maybe somebody's
Yeah,
complaining.
they'll say, put it out.
Have a complaint.
Right.
Can you walk down the street or
Would
whatever?
you put that out and stop this?
Nobody's getting cuffed and stuffed and
It's not gonna happen. They're not gonna.
I'd feel better if it were spelled out, just, not that I had questioned the probity of our law enforcement. I mean, but I'm not their word is good enough for me person.
Okay, so what I'm kind of getting from the conversation so far, if we were to pass this just along as a bulleted list of recommendations, there has been this point of sort of exploring sort of best practices for dispensary design, what we can do with that, looking specifically at air scrubbers because there's concern about the smell from, not dispensaries necessarily, but from consumption lounges. Also, it seems generally like there hasn't been much in favor of adding additional buffer zones. And there's also now this question of potentially writing down these specific enforcement guidelines and having this as some sort of physical document as well with submission.
That can come a lot of different, through a lot of different channels.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question before we move from the kind of buffer issue, and that's about signage? Because this group has talked before about wanting to, I feel like several of you have talked about encouraging responsible consumption. And so I'm wondering if within any sort of defined zone or in any discrete areas, you think you would like to recommend sort of responsible consumption signage?
Oh, like, you could smoke here, park, or something to that effect, is that?
However you see it, I just wanted to raise the
This,
issue.
I showed this, Jonathan, before. This is from a coffee shop in Amsterdam that is really one of the classiest places. It's called,
Which one?
Forioni's.
Oh, nice.
Unbelievable, best hash in Amsterdam. Anyway, that is their consumption rules. That's what their advisory. They advise people, and you can go to their website as well and see all of that. But that is how they advise people to consume safely. It's very well written and it's very well put out.
So that's great at the, say, point of consumption
Right.
for a lounge or even within a dispensary, but I was thinking of logistics.
Now
That
that,
merchandising signage, like big gummy bears in the window,
No, I mean
big hairs.
public signage.
public safety signage.
In the same way, so on the highway, on the throughway, they've got the blinking lights saying no intoxicated driving, that includes weed, or I think they
Yeah,
have.
no, that's these catchy
Yeah.
phrases.
That was the boring version of it, but something along those lines. And I'm wondering if you all think that within defined spaces or zones, we can signal either more responsible or more kind of courteous consumption.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
I do think, yeah, so what should that look like?
That's a graphic issue. I have a few good graphic designers and copywriters.
Well, not even just what do you think it should say? I'm going back to your beach example. Even if we don't make a buffer zone, maybe in lieu of a buffer, we think about like courteous consumption signage.
Like a pick up after your dog sign.
Yes,
Yes,
perfect,
exactly.
yes. Like, don't blow smoke into a baby's face type stuff.
Really? Yes. I always held my son this way and he was that way.
By the wind.
Does,
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yes, I like that.
do you all have any appetite for coming up with some slogans?
Yeah. I think so.
Now are we thinking street sign, thinking ticker sign?
Those are expensive.
Maybe signs that people can put in their store windows.
Interesting.
You know, that's a community thing. Maybe some of the taxes can go to printing those signs and giving them to businesses that want to have them.
Yeah.
That's
We
one way
we
to
all
take
breathe
some.
this air, consume responsibly.
Ooh.
That's nice. Exactly, things like that, you know. And I like that, don't blow smoke in babies' faces.
I mean, that says it all.
That, really, I mean, you know, we had a problem with dogs in my driveway. People just leaving dog food. So we put up a sign that said, please don't let your shitty little dog shit here. Have a nice day." And it really worked. They didn't for that time. And somebody stole my son. I'm sure they wanted it. But anyway, what I'm saying is that something really not like that, but something very catchy that people will laugh at, or some great graphics of somebody stoned, or, you know, be careful of the curb.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
right. What's that?
Be
Oh.
careful of the curb.
Yeah, watch your step.
You know,
Yeah.
watch your step.
Interesting. I mean, maybe we could, that's worrying. Maybe we could piggyback on the
Are you guys gonna need me to stay here for this meeting or?
So I'll spend, can I come on one second, please? So to piggyback on the Ulster County I Voted effort, maybe we could also have a contest.
Oh my God. Of
That's
course,
great.
no, that's the deal.
Yes.
So maybe we could have some kind of city-created, consume responsibly signage, the kind of DPW created, and then have a contest. And for those PDF downloadable,
Yeah, right, you could put a
Oh,
sign on your window.
but would be good.
And that's another way to use some of the tax funding, and it's a little bit of a money.
And it's getting everyone involved.
Right,
You know?
so it's putting it back into the community for things like that.
But I don't think a 13-year-old kid will win this one.
No,
Hopefully not, you
yeah,
know?
do it for people 18 or 20.
Yes, you should, yes, for sure,
Should
yeah.
be, right. Can't have little kids in
Yeah.
school.
We have to be 21 and over.
21.
Yeah.
Or you might get a three-year-old that says, don't blow smoke in my face, daddy.
Yeah, some great
Yeah.
names.
Or it's just a plan. Did you ever read that book? The
Yeah.
kid's book, it's just a
Yeah.
plan.
I do that.
Okay, so just before we move on to our next question here, I'm having some weird technical difficulty. Jeremy, Steve, can you still hear us all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. My screen has gone concerning.
All right, that may be sort of the end of that computer.
Oh, my God.
That's, yeah, I'll figure that out later.
Right before we sort of maybe move to the next point about, well, maybe it actually is moving to the next point, if you guys are ready.
Sure.
The tax revenue gets to be a little tricky because we've got sort of the tax money and then there's sort of the other funding that I alluded to at the outset. And while there's space for recommendations on the tax revenue, that gets a little trickier in terms of the city making firm commitments because there is some obligation to use whatever money is generally available to offset the tax levy. But to the extent there is, I just wanted to signal that because, I don't think the city was able to fully commit every dime without sort of running afoul of other obligations. But within those parameters and thinking about the fact that there is also this other funding that will eventually become available, that's sort of the framework of the next part of the discussion.
So the other funding will be, I believe you said earmarked towards certain things. But the tax, we get 3%, or I don't know what the number is. But the sales tax generated, that's going directly to the general fund. And what we're gonna do is make recommendations of how we think that money should be dispersed from the general fund. But the other money goes directly towards things that we want to apply them to.
Slight variation. You're completely correct about going into the general fund, and it is up to the city and specifically the council, if it, approves the budget, to come up with any plan it deems appropriate. I was just signaling that there is an obligation to consider available general fund funds to offset the tax levy. So it's not as though the city, I think, can commit all of those funds to a purpose, even if, a new purpose that's remedial, if it wanted, it has some other obligations for funding. But within its scope of discretion, it'd be great to have that conversation. Separately, there is the grant funding, which will become available. And that was sort of the data collection effort that I talked about at the outset.
So we're talking about for the tax, the city can collect a fraction of that collection. The council could potentially earmark for a new purpose.
Potentially. And there is also the funding from the other source, which must be used for a remedial purpose. So
Yeah.
I think it's up to the council and, working with the controller and all that to figure out, how to draw the right lines. But this group is tasked with coming up with some priorities, and I'd like for you guys to sort of start talking it through before I jump in and talk about one of the affordable housing ideas that's already on the table. Thanks.
Of the available monies that we have to work with, I thought that we could, break them up into like different categories, So there could be categories that, one of them could be to cover costs related to the taxed activity. And so this could be like something that Jeremy had talked about having the map, like the map with purposeful dispensary locations. And but this could be like, kind of an official map. And so it would entice the folks who are running the establishments, the consumption lounges and the dispensaries, to be within the law, because then they are part of this, official map of all of the, approved kind of businesses in Kingston that you can patronize, And so then, then there are still the gray market ones, which are gonna be there anyway, but they are not on this like, official walking tour of, or however we would do it, we have the ability to really do something that no other municipality has done and really, do creative things with this money. And, why not kind of embrace it and make it a destination spot in a way, and kind of, not necessarily celebrate it, but, what was that?
Promote it.
Yeah, promote it, exactly, yeah. I mean, and also with that would be also what Jeremy had talked about was the, you know, public transportation funding, so you can have, you know, I mean, you could have dispensary tours, you could
Or
have,
buses that go between dispensaries, like they have, that go between bars.
right, so that you can get home safely and
Right.
you don't have to worry about driving.
Right, take the cannabis bus. Home.
Magic bus.
You know, yeah, why drive, right? Don't drive by, take the bus.
I thought another category could be, just to allocate revenue to just general public activities, like we do other, taxes, and so you know, I have to say, I personally am, and this would also be for like kids, you know, a lot of kid-related activities. I mean, we could have the skate park that so many people want. We could fund sports leagues, we could improve parks and playgrounds, we could have free daycare. We could, I mean, eventually, we will get so much money, I mean,
It's gonna be a lot.
it's gonna be a lot, that we really could do so much. We could have free trade school, I mean, I know that this has been talked about on a county level, but we could have, you know, I mean, you know, so I have a child in fourth grade in Kingston, and, you know, they have had one field trip, she's in fourth grade, one field trip, and they had to raise money for this field trip, and it was only to go to the Maritime Museum. And I mean, I love Maritime, nothing against Maritime Museum, but like, when I was a kid, I went to field trips a lot, I grew up here, and, you know, they shouldn't, why can't we, you know, have a stipend for, say, the Maritime Museum? And like, this is for 50 free field trips this year, or this is for, you know, whatever, and let the kids, you know, we really need so much more for the kids, and if we have more for the kids, then that is a natural deterrent for them getting into drugs.
Absolutely, keep me busy.
Yeah, yeah.
I really like that, Tanya.
Oh, thanks, yeah. I mean, I've been trying to think out of the box about this, you know, so I think that, I like the idea of more public space, and so, I think that maybe like buying up landmarks or et cetera, and making them for the public. You know, making like a community, boat dock, community boat ramps, just more places free for the public to be where there's not an expectation of them spending money. To just be with each other and be community, you know? And then another, you know, allocation category that we could have would be to, you know, help, like a restorative justice kind of framework, you know, and I mean, mental health is chronically underfunded. We could fund, you know, we could have, of course, you know, this is kind of a different aspect of a different part of the money, but, you know, job placement for folks, mental health treatment, you know, helping people navigate the system. Just trying to navigate the system, when you're a person, you don't have internet, maybe you don't have a computer, you don't have access to these things, you need somebody to help you navigate the system. The system is Byzantine, you know? I
So
mean,
which system are we talking about?
any system to get public help.
Funds,
And this can,
Medicare, Medicaid.
that's a huge spectrum, yeah, I mean, just even locally. It could be
Yeah,
like that kind of thing, Medicare, what have you, but it could be, I know we're gonna talk about housing, and, you know, housing, of course, is enormous, maybe the number one, you know, issue that we have. You know, but linking them to medical care, legal services, to address barriers to reentry, you know, more mobile psychiatric crisis units, coordinated care for patients experiencing their first episode of psychosis. I mean, you know, we could have a special needs park. We could have more youth programs. We could help the soup kitchens, and the homeless shelters more, and the job programs. I mean, I really think that like when the money starts coming in, there's gonna be so much And we really could do so many different things with it.
So can I ask you, because I've been trying to take down.
I'm sorry.
No, they're great, and there are a lot of them, and I don't want to miss them. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind circulating those in the email to the group?
Totally.
And then if you have any thoughts about sort of tiers or, in the short term, when money first starts trickling in, you think we should prioritize this category. And then as it increases, kind of maybe breaking it out in a couple of
Right.
different levels.
I get what you mean.
That might be helpful because some of these feel like longer term and collaborative initiatives.
Right.
And you also signaled with one of them, I noted there's some talk at the county level. And then trade school one.
Yeah.
There have already been some really interesting discussions here about different support for either job training or placement. Some of those would be Kingston specific, but if also of efforts underway where we could coordinate, maybe just note that when you circulate the
Sure.
recommendations.
Absolutely.
Dutchess County just came up with a full course in cannabis management.
I saw that.
And other, you can actually get a degree now in Dutchess County Community College in different fields of cannabis.
Right.
So that would be a great idea.
It was like
Also-
retail. Was it retail? Yeah.
Yeah, how to work in a retail store, but they're gonna extend it to growing, to all these aspects of the business. You're gonna be able to get a degree now in New York for that.
For me, I had, really, the only thing that kept coming up is jobs. You could create new positions in places like Park and Rec. We used to have summer help that would come along and those kids would fill all the gaps of all the workers that were on vacation. And, the medians were actually mowed and, the parks were clean and the bathrooms were all open and clean. And there's just so much, so fast that happens in May and June that our handful of parks and rec guys that go around from the time the sun rises till 5, 6 o'clock at night and they're weed whacking and mowing and they're just going in loops and we're really not doing the best job we can. We just spent a whole lot of money on Broadway and Cornell Street and the Rotary. And there's places that should be beautiful all the time. And if you don't have the people picking the weeds, it's not beautiful all the time, or the people going through cleaning up the trash. I was recently in Innsbruck and I was out on an early run and they have these manless operated Zambonis going down the streets at like 5 a.m.
Wow.
every
No
morning.
people in them?
No people in them, like at Sam's Club, they have those little things that go around and clean and they just go by touch and feel
Like
and
industrial Roombas.
industrial.
Yeah.
And it's like, the city is like so busy and so hectic during the day and every morning I wake up and it's beautiful and I'm like, so I get talking to a local and he says it's all about the parks program. There's just so many workers and they put money into that, and I thought there's something that extra money could go
That's a
into
good
that. would-
idea, because it could double, like maybe summer programs for kids who need jobs.
Right.
16 and up,
Exactly.
have them in every park, weed whacking, picking up the garbage, doing whatever. So that's exactly what it is, and help the community by hiring kids. There's the funds to bring 100 kids into the community.
And that's so good for the kids.
Absolutely.
That they feel like they're a part of it, they have a stake in the community.
Yeah, they put money in their pocket and parents are happy and
I mean, I think the general idea, like Emily had brought up, the whole concept is these kind of programs to be able to pay people to do a decent job at something in the community.
Yeah.
And that's really where the money is really gonna be the most valuable funnel, especially youth programs.
I do like the map idea, like even to go broader, public service announcement, welcoming the new dispensary and profile the owner and where's this stuff grown and,
Sure.
you
Well,
know.
we could partner with something like Chronogram with Wire and do that, once a month, once every whatever,
Right,
and get them to profile people like that.
so that you know who the real businesses are, and, you know, we're collecting tax dollars from this real business and it's going back into your community. So there's that message that needs to be sent also. There is a lot of give back that's going to be involved. I think, you know, I read in Great Barrington in the first 3 years for a town of 7,000 people, they brought in almost $7 million.
Wow.
So, you know, I understand they collected a lot of tax dollars from New Yorkers because that's where you go.
Yeah.
But by the same token, that's a lot of money real quick.
Yeah, and it's gonna be that way. And like Emily was saying about the destination, making Kingston a destination. And in conjunction with what Steve was concerned about, people smoking on the streets and stuff, I think it's essential to have decent, beautiful lounges. So like, imagine New York State with liquor stores and no bars.
Right.
That's kind of the proposal in every other state. We just have dispensaries. So if you go as a tourist in the city and you can buy it, but you can't smoke, well, you're not gonna smoke in your hotel.
Right.
You can't smoke in a park, it's not gonna be feasible or whatever. You're gonna go to your car, you can do that now.
Right.
But to have beautiful lounges where you can actually, like a bar, so you can go and have a great time with friends and smoke a few joints. And the inventions of consumption right now are like over the top with flights that you can take, you know, only to get into the other parts of it. But to have like Uptown Kingston, if you had 5 beautiful lounges dispersed, it would be remarkable. What a destination. You can walk everywhere. You don't need to drive anywhere. Restaurants, dispensaries, bars, and lounges. It would be like an incredible, you know, just like an infusion into the neighborhood. If you could walk down Wall Street after 6 o'clock at night naked, nobody would see it. Believe me, I live on Wall Street. I don't see anybody naked. But I don't see anybody. That's what I'm saying. Any time during the week, seriously, after 8 o'clock, it's like a ghost town. And every store is closed. So keep the bars open, keep the restaurants open, have great lounges. And then maybe the stores will follow suit and stay open until 8, 9 o'clock. And then you'll have a thriving community. People will be spending money everywhere. People go out to eat, they go for a drink, they want to go out and shop.
Bill, I'll go back to your point though about transportation,
Right.
because Uptown isn't the only area that I think Bartek identified as a potential lender space. But Uptown is more dense and probably more walkable. You've got
Right.
well, you've got hotel space and all of that, and that's not necessarily true in every area. There can be a lounge, so maybe there still is a transportation related concern to address.
Well, free bus service is like an incredible way to do it. We do have free buses already.
You know, it might behoove us to have a couple positions created that would, you know, be kind of an informational center for the city's, you know, cannabis questions, you know, and because there's going to be a variety of questions that arise from people, and it could be anywhere from, you know, where am I allowed to, where am I not allowed to, you know, it could even be questions about, you know, the strains themselves, or it could be questions about, you know, where's the money going, or I don't, you know, I just see a lot of, I see, you know, or people might even have complaints,
Like a
you know.
liaison type.
Exactly, yeah. You're gonna need, because these people are not gonna know where to call, and they're gonna call the, you know, the city and the police chief and, you know, all these things, and, you know, there might just, it would be good to have like a centralized location of, for people who have questions or concerns, or, you know.
Maybe as a starting place, right now we have a pretty sad MRTA task force page, which I think only has
Our names on it.
your names and maybe like a link to expungement, although that was maybe one of the other points we had for updating that with some of the recent programs. But maybe that's sort of the place to start building.
Yeah,
Some frequently asked questions, maybe a complaint,
Right.
portal. I know, our website is in the process of a long overdue redesign, and so this might be a really good moment to start raising that. And then as things progress, build out that site as a place, at least where people can start going. I don't think it'll probably be the next couple of phases down the road before there's revenue for a person. I
Sure,
imagine.
no, oh, sure.
But at least
Yeah.
a
resource.
some resource,
Yeah.
and then we can maybe.
Somebody might be like, I was arrested, but I want to start a business. Does this apply to me? You know?
That really ties into sort of the equity function a lot of these grant funds are linked to. And that was also a thought that kind of occurred to me with this idea of transportation as well. There's sort of an equity level of that as well, because I mean, if you're looking at kind of where poverty is felt, having that available means of transportation beyond just fuel and people getting to consumption sites, it'll just help to move people throughout the city. That's all an equity issue.
So just to follow up on that, was that your idea to move, I guess there are different approaches, there could be a kind of Ulster sort of tour.
Yeah, cannabis loop that stops at every lounge or dispensary.
But it sounds like you were maybe talking about a more broadly available city loop. I guess those aren't usually exclusive, I'm
that's-
just curious
It
about.
could be the same thing.
That's exactly how it's written.
And also we were talking about doing signage. Well, maybe some of them say, are you high? And they have Uber and the number for Uber.
Huh, interesting,
Yeah.
nice.
You know, just something
Yeah.
very simple like that, or
Yeah.
Lyft, or the local Kingston Cats, whatever,
Right,
you know. Leave your car at the bar,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Just as we're getting into the last couple of minutes here, I really hope I haven't missed anyone on Zoom. My computer is possibly destroyed. So if anyone's got anything that they want to add, who hasn't as much of a chance to speak, just please come off mute and add it in.
You just started talking.
Yeah.
I think most everything I was thinking was covered. Except I had one idea for the fraction of funds that potentially could be not used for offsetting the tax levy, would be like a small community grant program, kind of like micro grants for some of these issues. I've been pretty heavily dissuaded from the idea of bus service and whatnot, particularly around UCAT, because it's a county service, and so it just makes it, I've been told it makes it too difficult to have the city give money to the county, and that's just not gonna fly. So, I like the idea of a small fund for community. There could be different periods and categories where 4 times or twice a year or 4 times a year, it opens up for applications for, whether or not it's, people want to start a local nonprofit and need startup funds, city beautification, a number of things could be utilized in a small grant program that could go to a range of priorities, from health to art to environment, etc.
One of the things I love about that is that it leaves this open space for kind of ideas to bubble up, as opposed to, trying to foresee everything at the outset. So I think we just have a minute or two left, but I just wanted to foreshadow something that, if it hasn't already been talked about at one of the council meetings, I think it may have been, it certainly is going to be part of the presentation tomorrow night, which is about the planned affordable housing reserve fund. As part of the rezoning draft that's, been circulating, commented on in various forms, there is a component of, well, there are 2 things. One, there's a really stringent kind of cap on short-term rentals. And there it's calibrated so that, 99% of the housing, basically to be strictly limited so that it would affect more than 1%. The number of permits would be limited to no more than 1% of your housing stock. But there are also registration fees and penalties that will be assessed for violating our short-term rental regulations. And I believe tomorrow night they're going to talk about how the penalties have been increased to align more closely with state law than they were in the last version of the draft. So that's one source of funding. The other are the affordability contributions for developers that either create some, but not the full amount of the affordable housing that they're required to. They will be required to pay a fee. And there will be discussion about kind of calibrating that to optimize affordable housing creation. Both of those pools of money will be set aside in an affordable housing reserve fund. This also, I'm bringing it up now because there's also space, given some of the grant funding that we were talking about, to maybe think about cannabis-related community, basically the remedial funding, as another way to multiply our affordable housing reserve once those funds become available. And so that's easier from, that tax levy perspective, because it's not tax money, it's just grant funding available that has not been available heretofore. And so at least currently the discussions are around trying to draw some of those funds for our kind of highest rent burdened areas and targeting anti-displacement funding directly towards dedicating those funds to anti-displacement efforts.
Good.
So
We're sort of close on our time here. I would like to start just writing down some of the recommendations that kind of come out here, circulate that in the group, see if there's some more discussion on that. It definitely sounded like some of the concrete things we were getting out of here. Definitely in opposition to creating additional buffers on the municipal level. That's a concrete thing we can pass along. There's this idea of using some of these funds potentially to create signage, potentially even stuff that we can hand out to these facilities that they can sort of use as they want. And then generally with this question of revenue, some questions around some of the uses, but it did seem like there was strong support of this idea of sort of investing in these community jobs and being able to use it that way. So I'll start putting something together that we can kind of circulate and develop further, but does that sound like it's kind of major basis so far? Yeah.
this is really exciting. Yeah. And you'll circulate your
I'll
thoughts.
Yeah.
I'll clean it up a little bit and
I can make like a nice letterhead from the group.
So maybe as we kind of tighten all this up and circulate, we can think over email about when it makes sense to meet again, and then who we should try to bring into that conversation as well, because these are really great ideas, and maybe we should see about getting some council members as part of the discussion once this material gets compiled.
Yeah.
Because we could find out from also from the council what does Kingston need that they can't afford to pay for. And that involves community. Let's see if what they can't, like you were saying, well, we can't pick up everything, we can't. Let's hear from the council, what's lacking.
Though without speaking for the council, I think it would also be great if you guys shared your.
Oh,
views
yeah,
and
for
stuff.
sure. Oh, no, it works both ways.
Yeah.
Have you seen any sign from Albany that we're going to have an improved facility here at any time soon, or kind of listening on, do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah, we still don't know.
Do we know if there's any applicants for dispensaries or lounges for Kingston?
We have not received notification of an application.
Okay.
Not
Just
to say it's
curious.
not out there.
Yeah. I knew of some potential, but I didn't know if there's been any progress. So.
Great, well, thank you everyone, this has been great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yep. Thank you for everyone on Zoom. I'm gonna shut my computer off. I think that's going to.
I think that's the end.
That did not look friendly.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. It's pretty good.
I mean, I'm okay with allotting some of the tax dollars for any